So let's talk about products. You would agree with me that products are probably the most important part when it comes to a business, because without a product, there's nothing to sell. So now when it comes to creating a product, there are three key elements. The first one is called components. Now this is very important if you are creating a physical product. You need the raw material components that goes into making the product. So for example, with a cake, you need flour, sugar, eggs. Those are the raw materials you need. So that's components. The second one is add-ons. This is very useful if you outsource a particular part of your production process. So with the cake example, if you outsource the baking to a third party, you can put the cost of the third party as an add-on. And then finally, production activities. These are the activities you need to perform to create the final product. So for example, with a cake, you need to mix the ingredients, you need to bake, you need to decorate the cake, and then you need to package it. All those are production activities. So when it comes to calculating the cost of your product, on Bloompulse, we figured out a way to attach a cost to these three elements so that we can tell you a total cost price of each of your products. Let me show you how it works. So if we go to products, you can see here all the existing products I have, but we'll create a new product together. So if we say add new product, it shows you two options, from a template and from scratch. I'll show you how to create it from scratch, and then at the end, I'll show you how to do it easily from a template. So if we go from scratch, we're going to create a vanilla cake product together. So if I call it vanilla cake, and under variants, I try to use, when it comes to cake, I use the size of the cake as a variant. I mean, the size of the batter is the best way to set up the variant. So if I have 600 grams of butter, I can put the selling price as 1.5. You can also leave this as 0 if you want. If I want 1,000 grams of butter, 2.5, and if I want 2,500, so continue and submit. Right, so now we've set up our products and the different variants. Right, so you can see here the product and the three variants I set up: 600 grams, 2,500, and 1,000 grams of butter. Now if I go to configure product, so under components, like I said, these are the raw materials, what goes into it. If I click here, I'll be able to select the components I need. I need flour, I need eggs, I need sugar, I need butter. Now let's say I need something else that is not here. I can create it. We cover creating a store item in the store items video, but so it's the same thing. You click simply say from a raw material, and you can type in the name of the store item you need and the price. I wouldn't go over it again. We covered it you can check out the creating the store item video if you want to see how it works. But essentially, once you create it, it adds it to this list. Next thing you want to do is set the measurements. So for 600 grams of butter, what do I use? So maybe for this, I use 120 grams of butter, I use 120 grams of flour, I use 120 grams of sugar. Make sure that you are setting the right measurements here. Grams is fine, grams is also fine here. And finally for eggs, I use 1 piece of egg, right? And so you can click here to save. It will also save automatically. You can already see the cost price here for just the components. If we do the same thing for 1,000 grams, if I use 200 grams here of sugar, 200 grams of butter, and 200 grams eggs, and this time around I use 2 pieces of eggs. And finally for 2.5, if I use 400 grams, if I use 3 eggs, if I use 400 grams of flour, and if I use 400 grams of sugar. Okay, so that's it. That's how I set up the components, and I can already see the cost price of the raw materials. Now the next bit is add-ons. Like I said, if I outsource any part of the production process, I'll click it as an add-on. For this cake, I don't outsource any part, so I'll move on. I'll ignore this. And then finally for activities, I simply want to include all the activities that goes into creating this. So yes, customer interaction, when the customer reaches out to me and tells me what they want, and we have a discussion, that's for customer interaction. I do mixing, baking, I do packaging, and that's it. I think those are the three main things I do with this cake. I will not include decoration into the cake simply because I create I create the frosting as a separate product, and I'll show you how to do that. So how does this work? Next thing I want to do is essentially I'm taking the time. If you notice, you can see cost per hour of all these activities, and that comes from expenses. So if you watch the expenses video, you will see how we arrived at this cost per hour for all these activities. And that's why we set up expenses and we did allocation of expenses, so that when we come and say, oh, for this I spend around 5 minutes on packaging, I spend around 45 minutes on in mixing and baking, and I spend around 10 minutes in customer interaction and support. The system is able to calculate and tell you your total cost of activities. So essentially, it's bringing your expenses into the production cost. So things like your rent, things like your gas, things like your employer salary, things like your own salary. This is how you bring it into the cost of production of your product by using activities. So if we do something similar, we use 10, we use 45, and we use 10, and we set the same thing here again. Say 10, use 40, 10, and then here we say 55 instead. By the time we save, we should see a total cost price. So once you've done that, you remember we saved components. We set up our component measurements here, and we didn't set anything as add-ons, and then we set our activity times here. At the end of the day, if you go back to variant, you should be able to see the cost price for each of your product variants. So that's how we set up the product. Now let's do it one more time because I know we went through a lot. So let's do another one together. So if we go back to products and we say add new product and we say from scratch, this time around let's create buttercream frosting. So if we say buttercream and continue, same thing here. I'll use the size of the batter as the variant size. So let's say I do 500 grams and I do 1000 grams. All right, and I save and I submit. Okay, so here you can see that we've created the product buttercream. We've set up two variants, 500 grams and 1000 grams. And now let's go for the configuration. And so what goes into buttercream? I think it is butter and it is also sugar. So we have butter, we have sugar. So for 400 grams, let's say we do 250 grams of butter with 250 grams of sugar. And for 1000 grams, we do 500 grams of butter with 500 grams of sugar to make our 1000 grams. That's our component setup. And then moving on to add-ons, the similar situation, we don't outsource any element of the production process here, so we'll leave add-ons as is. And then finally, activities, and this is mixing and baking. Okay, so this is where we mix the butter and the cream together. And so here we're going to set up the activity times. So how much time does it take us to mix it? So let's say it takes 15 minutes for this one, and this one it takes 20 minutes. Okay, so once we are all done, we save, and then we can go back to variants and we can see the cost price here, and we can see the selling price as well. You can also see your margin. That's the difference between cost price and your selling price, your profit margin. One thing that I can show you quickly is that you can change your selling price. Like, for example, if you see that your margin is too small, you can change your selling price to something like 7,000. You can also set a target margin. So, for example, if your target margin, you want to target a 35% profit margin, right? You can set that here and save. So what that means is that if your cost price rises to the extent that it is more than your target margin, you would see a red signal here showing you that you need to adjust your selling price. And this is very important because, for example, store item prices can increase. And once you, for example, flour can become more expensive. So if you buy flour and you put it in your store and you record it at a more expensive amount, the system is going to automatically increase the cost price here, right? And so another thing that could happen is that you could be using more expenses, right? You could increase salaries, you could be paying more on power bills, you could be paying more on utility bills, you could be paying more for gas, for example, and that would increase the cost price as well. So as cost prices increase, it will reduce your margin. So the whole idea of the target margin is to show you a signal when the margin is lower than your expected target so that you can know that you need to take an action and increase your prices soon.